Hello, everyone. Brandon Harvey here. Welcome to this week's episode of Sounds Good. This is the podcast where every single Monday I sit down with an inspiring person and talk about happiness, overcoming struggles, and living a life of intentionality and wonder. This week I have Tyson Motsenbocker on the show. I actually grew up watching Tyson perform. We grew up in the same hometown, Little Pullman, Washington, and we're connected in all sorts of ways. I've been keeping tabs on Tyson since we both left Pullman, and it's been incredible to watch his journey as an artist. I always knew Tyson was talented, but about a year ago, he started to really turn up. He was actually blowing up. He opened for James Bay, then he opened for Vance, then he toured with John Foreman, and all while this was happening, NPR did an incredible feature on his new album, and Starbucks across the world started playing his music. To quote the NPR article, Tyson's new album, Letters to Lost Loves, is a strongly formed debut album from someone who's been through the ringer spiritually, physically, and emotionally. Today, Tyson and I dove deep into the story of loss, doubt, and growth he's been experiencing over the last few years, and it's truly left me so inspired. I hope you feel the same way. Oh, and stay tuned through the end of the episode to hear one of the most powerful songs off Tyson's new album. This is going to be so good, let's just jump straight into the conversation. All right, everybody, I am here in the studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Tyson Motsenbocker just flew in on an airplane. Tyson, welcome to Nashville.
Thanks for having me, man.
Dude, this is so fun.
It is fun. I agree.
So, get this. Tyson and I actually went to high school together.
Sort of.
We went to the same high school at different times.
Yes.
And so we were reminiscing just now about like all of our old experiences back in our hometown of Pullman. I remember that you were fantastic at Ultimate Frisbee. Are you still fantastic at Ultimate Frisbee?
I am okay at Ultimate Frisbee.
Okay, that's good.
I like to play Frisbee golf now.
That's good. That's kind of the old guy version of
That's right.
Ultimate Frisbee.
It's the aging Ultimate Frisbee guy plays Frisbee golf, just like how the aging normal guy plays normal golf.
Exactly. Okay, get this. This is the memory that I remembered yesterday. You used to be a lifeguard at the Rainy Park pool.
Yes, I did.
I remember girls in my grade being like, Tyson Motsenbocker is like the hot lifeguard. Like they would talk about you as like the hot one. And,
really?
Yeah, and I'd be like, I knew that guy. Or I would tell them, I'm like, oh, I know that guy. Like I know Tyson.
Yeah.
And it was very impressive. Everybody was very impressed.
I was the world's worst lifeguard.
That's terrible.
I was horrible. I maybe not like at the actual life-saving part. I think I probably could have done that, but the sort of like day-to-day tasks, I was very bad at them.
You just went to tan? Was that kind of it?
Yeah, kind of like I came to get a paycheck, but then when I got there, I just was so bored. I have like horrible ADD, so like the idea of sitting in a chair for like, an hour at a time or whatever was the worst job ever for me.
That sounds awful.
Yeah. So like one time I pierced my ears while I was lifeguarding.
Oh my gosh.
And one time I would always make these contests up for these kids. So I would like tell the kids there's all these river rocks out next to the pool. And I told this kid one time to go and fill his t-shirt up with rocks. And then I told him to throw all the rocks in the pool. And then I said on the megaphone, I said, whoever gets the most rocks wins. But there was like so much dirt on the rocks that the whole pool turned into like this huge muddy soup.
Oh man.
And you couldn't see the bottom of the pool anymore because it was full of mud now. And my boss came out and I almost got fired for that one, but I for sure should have.
Oh my gosh. That is
but I didn't.
Absolutely nuts. I kind of want to unpack this idea. You grew up in Pullman most of your life, right?
We moved there when I was in the fifth grade.
In the fifth grade.
Yeah.
Okay. So like your formative years, junior high, high school, you and I we both had the same experience. We grew up in a small town and then we kind of left our small town and then we went on to do kind of creative things.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who stay in our little hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say that that's a negative thing. Like I've got friends who are like awesome and they like went to college somewhere and they studied agriculture and then they went back and they're going to like innovate and do amazing things on their family's farm.
Sure.
Like that's super cool. But there is something to be said for the fact that like we're in totally different places now. Like,
right.
What do you think was the catalyst for you in like getting out of our little hometown?
I think one thing for me was So my parents moved my family tons and tons and tons of times before we came to Pullman. So I always sort of had this feeling that was like what you did, that like you weren't supposed to stay someplace for very long. I think that was part of it. I think part of it was that I was really, really thirsty to see what the world looked like. And I think that when you're in a small town, you have this perception that like the world is better, right? That like there are better things outside of this because your perspective is just basically, your hands in front of your face. That's as much as you can see of the world. And I think that when you leave home, your perspective changes from it being better to it being bigger, right? And like, which isn't necessarily better. It's just that there is more. And like, I think that for me, one thing that really changed when I left was that I've started viewing agriculture and education as like noble pursuits.
Yeah.
That was a big thing that changed because I think
those were the only two jobs in our town for the most part. You worked for the university or you worked for a farm.
Exactly.
Or you like supported the people who did by
Yeah,
like having a restaurant so that they could eat.
Yeah, you owned the beer store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or my dad was a principal. And what did your parents do again?
My dad worked for the university.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it was like that was how it was. And I think that like sort of seeing those things as the noble pursuits of life. I think it's important. One part of growing up is seeing that like bigger is not always better, but it is more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been something interesting. And I moved to Portland.
Right.
And you, for the last several years, have been living in San Diego, right?
Yeah.
And you, for a while, were like working at a Starbucks.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And then from there, you kind of took the leap into the music world and you kind of went full on. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so I moved to San Diego. I was actually supposed to move to Portland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was supposed to move to Portland and work in the music business. I was going to be a booking agent.
Huh.
And then I graduated from college in a bad year for the American economy. And 1 week before I was supposed to start, the head of the agency called me and said that they were high and dry. They were like totally out of business.
Wow.
So I was like, I guess I'll just move to San Diego, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. Yeah, so I moved down there. I was working I got a job at Starbucks. I think one thing was that I felt trapped in that. Did you work jobs when you moved to Portland?
I was fortunate enough to be able to like kickstart my photography business when I moved to Portland. So I kind of was self-employed when I jumped in.
Totally.
Oh, wait, actually, no, that's not true. I just never talk about this, so I forget this.
Yeah.
I ended up getting a job at Makeup Artist Magazine.
Whoa.
I've never shared this before.
I'm really excited to hear about it.
Isn't this hilarious?
Yeah.
I was doing social media for them, and it was super fun, like learning how to do social media stuff with them. But it's like, it was a magazine for makeup artists.
Right.
And so I actually know way more about makeup than anybody would ever expect from me. But so that was like, I had to pick up a job like that when I moved to Portland.
Yeah. So I think for me, I remember like the music business is hard. It's a hard business.
Totally.
And I think like starting out, I always knew that's like ever since I was a kid, like that's what I always wanted. I wanted to write songs, like what I wanted to do, and play them and like share a human experience with a group of people.
And I grew up watching you play.
Yeah, totally. So I remember I was at Starbucks and I didn't really know how to start. And I think like one thing when I talk to people that are looking at making the leap, I always tell them like I think I remember feeling so stuck. And I actually also think that feeling stuck is a sort of like inherent characteristic of being in your mid to early 20s. I think that is part of it.
Okay.
Is feeling stuck.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is bad, but I think it's good to know that that's part of that stage of life.
That like a lot of people experience this at this point because it's a hump. You're getting over a hump.
Yeah, like I remember when I was like in this stage of my life, one of my friends' dads, there were like 15 of us living by the beach in San Diego and just like trying to surf and figure out our lives. And one of our friends' dads called us on speakerphone and told us that we were wasting our 20s. He's like, you guys are wasting your 20s. And that hit me really hard. And I didn't know what to say to him because I didn't know what to do. I was like, well, what am I supposed to do, man? Like, am I supposed to go work at a firm? Like, is that what's expected of me? Like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what a firm is.
Yeah.
But am I supposed to get a firm job? And so I remember being at Starbucks and feeling like, feeling stuck there. And being like, the only thing I can do with my life is to try to do the next Starbucks job, which is like, and I remember people be like, you should be a shift manager. I'm like, I don't want to be a shift manager. I want to play the guitar.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, and then I'd be like, this is the immediate thing that I can do is get a shift manager job at Starbucks. And I couldn't see outside of that at all. So a few years ago, this kid came up to me and he was like, I want to talk to you. I said, okay. He's like, I want to do what you do. And this was a year or two into me playing music full time. And I said, why do you want to do that? He said, because I feel like if I had influence, then I could do good with my influence. And I said, well, what do you do with the influence you have right now? And he said, well, nothing, because I don't have any influence. I was like, yeah, well, you have a little sister, right? I was like, or a brother or something. So yeah, I was like, well, there you go. What do you do with that influence? I said, because whatever you do with whatever influence you have, you will do it with more influence. And then I said to him, and right now you want to be me because you just saw me on stage and it looked like my life was rad. But what you didn't see today was every February when I am crying on the beach, wondering how I'm going to pay my bills that month. And I was like, he was like, you do that? I said, I've been playing music for 2 years now, and it has happened both years.
Wow.
Every February, there is a day where I am on the beach crying because I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. And I was like, and that's partly because February is a hard month to make money playing music, but also just because making that leap is difficult. But the thing that I want to tell people, and wish I could have told myself then, is that like, hey man, like crying on the beach in February is a better alternative than feeling stuck. It's okay to feel afraid, and it's okay to worry about your future, but it's not okay to be feeling stuck. Not to say that like everyone should go quit their jobs and play music full time or whatever, but I just think that like there is something for everyone to do that is not being stuck.
Yeah, well, it's not just this idea of being stuck. It's more so this idea of staying stuck.
Totally.
Of just kind of, I think that we all feel that stuck feeling.
Absolutely.
And the trick is you push through, or like you jump out, or you try something new.
Yeah.
Because the moment that you become stagnant, you lose your ability to do what you want to do, but also, make an impact in the ways that you want to make an impact.
And also, I think to live the full human experience.
Yeah.
I think that one of the most important things about living the full human experience is to be all of the things that it means to be a human. Like, so that means feeling sad and feeling happy and feeling afraid and doing things that are uncomfortable. Like, I think that the worst thing that you can do as a human is just to like be comfortable. Like, and by be comfortable, I mean like be comfortable, like work your way into a position of comfort and then just nest in it for your whole life.
Yeah.
That to me is what I don't want to do. Okay.
And so how did you felt stuck, you were in your job, and then all of a sudden like you were doing music full time. Like what was the jump? What was the leap?
The leaping point. Yeah. So one thing that happened to me was that when I was going to take that job at the booking agency, the head booking agent was basically like, "Hey man, if you're going to work here, it's going to be conflict of interest if you're playing. So you got to tell me that like you're going to lay that down for a while." And I agreed to not make music for at least the first few years I was going to be working there. And so I had that in my mind when I moved to California, and a friend of mine came up to me and he said, he's like, "You need to make music." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what to do." And he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I think I need $3,000. And he was like, "Why $3,000? And in that time in my mind, 3,000, it might as well have been $1,000,000. I was like, there were like 6 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment or something. So I was like, if I have $3,000, I think I can make a record and print 1,000 copies of it. And then I can sell those to people." And he was like, "Okay." And he went around and found $3,000 for me and gave it to me in a check and said, "Pay me this back if you can." And I said, wow. So I made the record, this little EP, and then I started just kind of touring So the first thing that I did was I just booked a tour up the West Coast. Like I played, I think 7 shows or something. And I just called places that I knew had music. And it was also partly my background of like trying to be a booking agent. I kind of knew a little bit about what to do with that. Anyway, so I booked all these shows, and I think like anywhere from 3 to 40 people came to them.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is pretty sweet. Like we played at where did we played in, I was playing solo actually for those shows. I was with one other person for a while. We played these tiny little rooms, little coffee shops and whatever else. And I sold a bunch of CDs to people, and I sold a bunch of CDs to people online, and then I put that money away, and that was basically the beginning. So after that, I mean, I've done everything that you can do in the music business. Like after that, I played bass for a band for a while, a horrible band that was trying to hire me out to go on tour. So I went on tour with them for a while, and then I played guitar in a different band, and then I toured my records more, and I did some Young Life camps. I did like a few of those in the summer.
And so you were just kind of covering the spectrum. You're like, I'm doing whatever it takes to make music.
Whatever it takes. And that actually, so that's something that I've been thinking about a lot now, is that the first stage of my career as a musician was just I was like, this is what I want to do. This is the banner, music.
Yeah.
So what's on anything that is under the banner that gives me money, I will do it.
Because that people do that all the time in photography, where they say, I want to be a professional photographer. And so they do all these things, like they're a sports photographer, they're a family photographer,
right.
They're a pet
wedding
photographer, wedding photographer, all these things, when what they really want is to be this other thing. But as long as they're being a professional, like as long as they're making money doing this thing that they like, or a tangent of what they like, they do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, I think actually that's phase 2.
Okay.
I think that's phase 2 because...
Interesting.
Because I think that figuring out how to run a business is hard to do.
Totally.
So like figuring out how to, just like basic things of running a business, like booking and like invoicing people and accounts receivable, like all these things that are business school 101 that it doesn't even matter if you took business school 101 because like you have to learn them for how they work for your own business. So that for me was kind of the first step. It was okay, I figured out sort of how this works a little bit. I think I can kind of do my taxes now. Kind of. And
you have money to pay taxes for also.
Right.
Yeah,
there's like a little bit of money coming in. So that's awesome. And then it's like, okay, now somebody said to me, and this was just, within the last like 3 years or something, was like, whatever you do every day is what you do. They said, it doesn't matter what your job title is. This could be for anything. It's whatever you do every day is what you do. And I thought to myself, well, what do I do every day? And I kind of like listed the things that I do every day. And I was like, that isn't what I want to do. Yeah. Like, I don't want to do those things every day.
For a lot of people, it's probably like, I know for me, oftentimes it's like, it is emailing and it is like writing blog posts. Like, it's just all these things that are like not, for me, not storytelling. That's what I want to be doing more of. It's like, It's not storytelling. And so that's interesting. Yeah. What you do every day is what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems so simple, but it's so obvious. Yeah. And I think that, like, in any job that you do, there's going to be stuff that you do that you don't want to.
Totally.
But if those are all enabling you to do what you want to do every day, then that, to me, is the dream. If you can do what you want to do every day and make a living, then that is the professional dream, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's, I feel like, for me, like, lately, it's been like, okay, so that meant, like, saying no to some things that I would never have said no to in the past because they were really comfortable things for me to do, and they were helpful for me. So I was like saying no to some of those other things. And actually, there's a podcast that I listened to with this guy named Merlin Mann, who I really like. And he said on one of his podcasts, he said that anything that you say yes to, you say no to 1,000 other things. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting because you don't see that as the truth early on or even later on, really. Yeah. It's like, okay, like here's an opportunity. I need to do this opportunity. Yeah. Not realizing that every decision that you make is taking you down a particular path, like branches on a tree. Yeah. And that like any branch that you pick, there are now 1,000 branches going the other direction that would have different opportunities.
Totally.
So I don't know. That was good for me too. Saying like I'm gonna try to, and it's still not the case for me, but I'm gonna try to do things that I would like to do because otherwise I am picking to do things that I don't want to do long term.
Okay, so remind me again. Phase one is
I think it is just jumping.
Phase one is just like taking a leap.
I think it is finding a way where you can have enough of a pad there, a safety pad. I mean, like when I was working at Starbucks, like my manager there was amazing and was like, hey, we love what you're doing. Like anytime you need to leave, leave. And there got to a point where it was kind of event horizon where she was like, okay, you are gone for 3 months.
Yeah.
And you're still technically on the payroll. Like I remember I worked a day and then I went on tour for 2 months, which was straight into another tour for a month. And then I came back and I worked 1 day. And I came in and I was like, hey, I have another 2-3 months gone, starting on Monday. And she was like, you should probably just quit. So, and I said, okay, well, I'm not sure this is going to work. And she was like, well, if you ever need to come back, like you can come back. So I think that for me was really, really helpful because you
created some sort of safety net.
I had a bit of a safety net, yeah, and I didn't know how that was going to work.
Yeah,
but
it's still a risk. You weren't playing it safe.
Totally.
But there wasn't really a worst case scenario.
No, worst case scenario is that I was going to go backwards, which would have felt really defeating to me.
Yeah.
But it would have been okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't have disappeared.
Right. And also, by the way, I'm not saying that like the goal is to leave your job at Starbucks. Like I loved, like I have a ton of friends that work there still, and I liked working there. And like that is a noble pursuit. Yeah. Just like working on a farm.
Yeah.
I think it's just like it's if you feel stuck in something, anything, you could be stuck feeling stuck playing music for a living.
Yeah.
And I think I like know some people that do that. And I know some people that work in coffee or whatever that don't feel stuck, and I would rather be them than my friends that play music and are stuck. So
yeah. Exactly. Okay, so phase one is create a safety net, but like take a jump.
Create a safety net, take a jump.
Phase two is
that is whatever you do every day is what you do. So just because your job title says one thing, you need to look at what you do every day, because your job title, in my case being songwriter and performer, doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
What you do every day is what means everything.
Yeah. Okay. And then phase three is?
I think phase three is just building those two things together.
Yeah.
So I think it's continuing to take those risks with safety nets. But I think it's like that's where I feel like that's where I am now. So maybe I don't know what phase three is. But I think that like I think that what I'm doing now, where I'm at right now is that I want to like do things that I love, that inspire me, that make me all of the reasons that I fell in love with music in the first place.
Yeah. And it's it's you going down the specific path you want to be going down. Maybe that's it. And it's, probably a part of that is probably the idea that you need to say no to good things so that you can say yes to great things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
That's probably phase three.
There you go.
We decided it.
Phase three.
Can't wait to find out what phase four is. I'm not there yet.
No way.
Oh, man. So I want to transition a little bit, and this is a little bit of a heavier note, but around in this same time, your mom came down with cancer. That's right?
Yeah, she did. So she was, my mom was my hero also.
Your mom is incredible.
Yeah, did you know her?
I had a few interactions with her that I remember, but then I also just like, I knew a lot of people that knew her. Like she was loved by the community.
She was,
and I knew you, and I knew your sister, and I knew your dad.
Yeah.
Tyson's dad was my middle school principal.
Did he ever suspend you?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Maybe.
He suspended me like 4 times. He still brings it up.
That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, during that time, so I was trying to figure out how to play music, and I was touring a ton. I was gone all the time. My mom got sick, and that was like, obviously a huge blow to me. And I think that like basically the way that worked out was that she would call me and she would say, "When are you going to come home?" And I was in denial the whole time. I was like, she's going to get better. Like she's going to be, and also because she was a strong person. So like the way that she talked about it was not with fear.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think when someone that you love talks with fear, it feels immediate. And when someone that you love who's going through a hard time doesn't talk with fear, it's easy to sort of push it aside. So I didn't go home. I like hardly ever went home. And I think while she was sick, and I think part of it was because I was avoiding it. And it was half because I was avoiding it because I naturally avoid hardship. I think everyone does, but I think I maybe do more than most people. And secondly, because I thought I was lying to myself and telling myself that she was going to get better. So finally, when things got really bad, I don't even know what they were, but she would talk about her numbers, which is some blood count number thing. I don't know what it is. I don't really talking about this stuff like logistically is the worst, but basically she had her numbers, and her numbers were, if they went up, it was bad. And if they went down, that was good. And so her numbers were always going up and down. It was this constant roller coaster. And one day her numbers went way up. And she called me and she's like, numbers are way up. Time to come home. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it got real fast. And so I flew home to be with her then. And that was like, I canceled everything. It's the first time I'd done that. Like I canceled like 5 months of gigs. I was like, I'm just coming home. It was in September.
And you were kind of, at this point you were, I don't want to say living the dream, but you were, on a further phase than you were at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I bet that was hard for you.
Well, I mean, the thing is that like, oh man, like maybe this is just me, but like, I think that in a creative field or anytime that you are owning a business or whatever, everything feels so important and so immediate. So like, for me, it was like, I've got this gig and this, maybe so-and-so is going to be there. And, if I cancel this thing, like who knows what that'll screw up for me. And I think I felt like for a long time in my life, I felt like the ground that I was standing on in every part of my life was I was standing on thin ice in everything. Like I was on big rickety stilts and that any tremor in the situation I was going to fall and it was going to be horrible. And part of that was that I didn't know what falling would look like, which I think is the worst. If you know what the fall is going to look like, I think you can brace for it. But for me, it was just kind of like the world will end. And so the whole time that I was kind of like, things were starting to work, which they hadn't. I mean, like I said, I was crying on the beach in February, so they weren't working that well. but like they were starting to work, and I was like, oh man. And so, yeah, like coming home then was basically me. In some ways, it was the first time for sure that I said to myself, hey, I had to look myself in the face and say, are there things in your life that are more important to you? Are there actually? Because the obvious answer to that is, yeah, of course there are things more important to me than my stupid career. Like people are more important. But then in practicality, like what you do every day is what you do, right? So like, do you actually love your family and your friends? Are you actually willing to put things aside when it comes down to it for them? And I really wasn't for a long time until like I got that call and I was like, okay, hey, like this is a short life and there are things that are important in it. And so I did. I went home and I canceled all my gigs, all like 5 months of them. All my shows. I had a couple tours in there and a bunch of other stuff. And I just flew home. I was just with my family for that whole time. And then she basically like counseled me through her own passing away.
Wow.
And and I was with her in the hospice and she passed away and yeah, I was there with her. So, and it was kind of the end of it. I think I remember I was sitting with her in her room and she was really sick and she was kind of not really with it. And I said to her, I said, Mom, I need you to tell me that I was a good son to you because I felt so guilty for not being home. And she looked at me and she said, you were very entertaining. And I said, Mom, that's not what I mean. And then she winked at me. It was like her saying like, it was her making an entertainer pun to me. I was saying like, it's okay. You're here. And you get it. You get why it was important for you to come home. And this was like, she was barely with it. Like she couldn't really put a sentence together. So I thought that was really clever of her in that time.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, dude. She was a clever one.
Man. And so she passes away.
She had her memorial service at my dad's school, which 700 people came to.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, which was crazy.
From all across the state.
Yeah, everywhere. I mean, there was everybody from Pullman was there, and everybody from all over the state, really. I didn't realize how many people like knew her and loved her, and then it was like, whoa, a lot of people here right now. Like the whole gym of the school was full.
Wow.
I was like, this is a huge thing. This is like a huge event for this little tiny town.
Man.
So.
And what was your response in the aftermath? You know, you said your mom was counseling you through everything, and then she wasn't counseling you through it.
So before she passed away, she said to me, we were driving in the car, and she said, Tyson, you gotta lean into this. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she said, you are going to try to avoid it, so don't do that. And I was like, well, what does that look like practically? And she goes, I don't know, do something stupid. I was like what? She goes, I don't know, just do something stupid and then think about it.
That's good.
And I was like, okay. So I was sitting in the hospice care. My sister was there. She was doing a puzzle. My sister, who speaks of you very fondly, by the way.
Your sister is the best.
She's going to listen to this, and she's going to be so pleased that we talked about her.
That's so good. Yeah. I mean, I hung out with her a year and a half ago, which is more recently than I hung out. I mean, you and I hung out last like 10 years ago.
It was a very long time ago. Yeah. So my sister was doing a puzzle, and I was looking at my computer, and one of my friends who lives in the Bay Area, lives in Oakland, posted a Facebook thing that was like, hey, does anybody want to walk into the city with me, with the city being Bay Area for San Francisco. And I read that, and I was like, does anybody want to walk to the city? Does anybody want to walk to the city? And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. It's like, I'm just going to walk to San Francisco. So I like get up out of my chair, and I walk into my mom's room. Once again, this is when she was in hospice, so she was barely with it at all. And I go, hey, Mom, I know what I'm going to do. And she opened her eyes, and I said, I'm going to walk to San Francisco. And she kind of closed her eyes, and then she said, you know, you could go all that way without getting anything done at all. And I was like, damn it. Like, that's not a good enough fix for her. So anyway, so she passed away. We did the memorial service. It was beautiful. And then I went home, flew home to San Diego. And then I woke up at 5 a.m. a couple days later, and I live in a town called Solana Beach, which is like north San Diego. And my mom had written me a letter that she wanted me to read later. And then she had she was cremated, so I had some of her ashes, and I walked down to the beach, and I read her letter, and I put half of this thing of ashes. There was a film canister for my film camera, and I put half of the ashes at this spot, this little beach by my house. And then I just started walking north, and I did that for a month, basically. I just walked every day for a month. It was actually 40 days exactly, which was not planned.
Wow.
But it always felt like that was sort of poetic that it happened to be 40 days. So yeah, I would just kind of walk for a while, and then I would find somebody's haystack or whatever. Or in LA, like I camped out in LA for 4 days, 5 days. In LA, I camped out in Orange County, camped out on the Marine base at Camp Pendleton. And
so your stupid thing was that you walked.
My stupid thing was that I just walked for 40 days.
And did you think about it?
Yeah. So that was the way that I have tried to describe it, I think, is that every morning I would wake up, and so, you know, the cars start coming, and I literally walked like in California, it's the PCH, the Pacific Coast Highway, which is the 1 or the 101 or the 5. And it's
beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's so beautiful. And some places more than others. But it is a highway. So like when you're driving it, it's like the California like dream, right? It's like these big, you know, sweeping cliffs and ocean and just In-N-Out burgers as far as the eye can see. But it's gorgeous, and you know there's Big Sur is there, which is incredible, like one of the most incredible places in the world. But it's a highway, so when you're walking it, it's like filthy. It's a highway.
Yeah.
It's like filthy and loud. So like I think like in my mind, I've been driving that highway as long as I lived in California, and it's like, oh, this is the most beautiful, pristine, peaceful place. But then you get out of the car, and it's just a bunch of people like listening to Pitbull in their Cadillacs or whatever. And so every morning I would wake up really early as I could, like when it was still dark, because there were no cars in the dark. And I would walk down the middle of the highway in the dark. And I would have no headphones on or whatever, or just me and my backpack and my shoes just being like along the road. And I would pick something. So like I basically like, you know, in grief or whatever, you've got the place where you keep your mind boxes, all the things that you have in your brain, all of, you know, your memories and your feelings or whatever. This is the best way that at least in my experience, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't know. But this is actually official science called mind boxes.
I like this.
Yeah, so I would, you know, you've got this place in your brain that's mind boxes, and when you have a traumatic experience or whatever, the mind boxes get tipped over. So all of the things that you keep in your mind boxes are scattered all over this room in your brain. And so I sort of realized that basically everything that I knew to be true, all of the way that I remembered things even, was all different. It was all scattered. So I would go and I would find a box, and this would be in the dark, in the middle of the highway, and I would find it, and I would look in it, and then I would sort of take all the things on the floor and I would put it back in there. Like for instance, like the first day I remember the thing that I picked up in my mind box was like, okay, what is gone? And it was, hey, Mom is not going to be at your wedding. Okay, I can wrap my mind around that. She's not going to be at my wedding. So what does that look like? And then I would kind of take all the pieces of the mom's not going to be at your wedding mind box, and I would look at them, and I would say, man, that is lame. And I would take them, and I'd put them in the box, and I'd put it back on the shelf. And that was basically what I did every morning. I would pick a new thing, and I would try to reorganize my mind. So that was what I did in the mornings. And then, you know, by 8 a.m., it's people listening to Pitbull in their convertibles. So I would, at that point, like I would just try to put my head down and like get through it, because it's hot and stinky and there's cigarette butts everywhere, and people just mad at you. People are just mad at you for existing. So I was just like, oh, get through that part. But the mornings were magical, and the evenings too. So.
And 40 days later, you made it to San Francisco, California.
Yep.
What did it feel like as you were walking up? Like, you could probably see San Francisco. What did that feel like? There's
this tower, the Sutro Tower in San Francisco is this big radio tower that's up on the hill, and I could see it from pretty far off. So the day that I knew today I was like, today I'm going to make it. I was in this little town, this kind of just the south end of San Francisco, and I went into this McDonald's there, and I was trying to write down what it would feel like to finish the trip. And these like 15 dudes walked in that were easily in their 90s, and they all had their like World War II bomber jackets on with their patches and their hats and everything, and they're like, you know, they're whatever ship they were on, and they come in, they sit down. There's like 10 of them sitting at this table next to me, and I'm trying to like kind of look through it and answer the question of like, what is it going to be like now? And these guys started talking about basically like the war. So like they're talking about the war, and they've got their coffee there, and I can tell that they've like been doing this for a long time. It's these old group of buddies that come and they get together and they talk about the war. And they start talking about sort of like all their buddies that don't come and hang out with them anymore. And eventually like kind of the tide of the conversation turned, and they, in less words, were trying to figure out if they were going to be okay. I think was the best way that I can describe it. Was like in this time of their life where they are basically like sitting at the bus stop, right? They're waiting for the bus to come, right? And they're like, are we going to be okay? And I realized that like that was the same question that I was asking myself the whole time, was, am I going to be okay? And watching these guys like sort of at the end of their lives ask the same question, I realized like, hey, that is not a question that we ever answer. The are we going to be okay is never a question that we ever answer. I think that is part of moving through life, and that is part of being okay, is just continuing to wonder and hope that we will all be okay in the end. And that was what I wrote. I wrote down about sort of just that feeling of hope, was that like, I think we are all okay in the end, and yet never having answered that question, even when we are 90 and talking about the war at McDonald's. And so that was what I was thinking about. I remember specifically, I was walking up the highway and I saw the Sutro Tower there, and it was the end, just like these dudes, the end of these dudes' lives. And I was like sitting there, I was like, this is such a day of ends for me. And that was my question, was, are we going to turn out okay? And I think we are, and I think we're never going to know that for sure. That was like kind of what I thought about on that last day.
And is that what inspired the album? Is that so? I mean, you released an album recently.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the heart of the album in a lot of ways.
So I mean, when I was doing my mind boxes in the morning, that was part of what would happen. Is that like, so I've got one of my songs on my album is called Honest, and the chorus of it is literally like, it is that process. It's me listing out the things that are gone now, right? So it's like it's me trying to figure out what's gone. And it's a pair of jeans, like the chorus is, it's a pair of jeans, it's a rude awakening. It's all these, like, it's a list of all these different things that I found are gone. And like, all of those have little memories attached to me. So, I mean, like, most of that record was either, like, I wrote lyrics while I was walking down the side of the road.
Okay.
So a lot of that record was either directly inspired by, or the songs were actually written while I was walking.
Wow.
So that's kind of where, and I mean, without that process of waking up and sorting through it, I wouldn't have any, more or less, I wouldn't have any of those songs that I wrote after that process, at least.
Because, I mean, if you hadn't done that, you might have gone back to playing things safe. You might have gotten into your little rut and tried to keep your head down and not think through things, and you would have maybe stayed there for a while, but you didn't. You jumped.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it was the process of saying, like, hey, like that question of my mom, basically without words, saying, like, is this more important to you? And I think that, like, I mean, you know, this happens in Nashville a lot, it happens in LA a lot, I guess it happens everywhere, but like the sort of thing is like the question of how do I find the magical algorithm that makes me a hit song, right? Like what's the trick? What's the thing that I plug my guitar into that makes a hit song come out of it? And I think that can sort of happen in anything in music and in art. And for me, it was just like, as long as I just sort of keep plugging away at this thing, it'll work. It'll work out. And I think like kind of that process in me was just me realizing like that art is supposed to inform life, right? Like art is supposed to be about life. Your life isn't supposed to be about art. I think that like
we get them switched.
Yeah, I think like that's the best art, is just honest commentary on reality and on life. And if the only reality that you're living in is how do I make art, then I don't think you really have anything to say. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't know if you do, because life is bigger than that.
And you kind of on your walk, you got to wrestle through the process of doubt and am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
And what are these feelings, and like what do I do with this pain?
Right.
And that's what people connect with
in
the album. Like, I've been listening to the album on repeat just in like preparation for hanging out.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because it's so raw and so real. And my pain points, I feel your pain points. But if you were sitting in a studio writing that without any experience behind it, I wouldn't be connecting with it in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that like you can, we recorded that thing up in this little like tiny little studio up in Victoria, BC, that's like basically completely covered in blackberries. And I was in there, and it was pretty soon after I finished my walk, and it was like still pretty real. It was still pretty new. And I think you can like, I remember like sitting in there like feeling it again. And I don't know if like I'm not saying that all music needs to be just this super like wrought emotion. That's kind of that was the process of this one for me, and it won't be in the future. Like, in other records that I make, are probably not going to have such a crazy like crisis of faith and a crazy spin of emotions and loss. But my hope is that I will enter into them in the same way, which is just like from an honest perspective of human life.
Yeah.
And not an honest perspective of what is it, why am I having a hard time being a professional musician?
Yeah.
I
feel like a huge part of your album, I mean, of course it was about, are we going to be all right? It was about loss, but a huge part of it felt like it was about doubt. And I think that's something that a lot of people shy away from. I know that I've had times where I've like shied away from doubting, I feel like we kind of grow up and we're like I don't know about you, but I feel like I was taught in a lot of ways, you shouldn't be doubting things. Like you should feel pretty confident in these things that you were raised in, whether it's this idea of, like how you see the world, how you see other people, how you see God, how you see politics, how you see yourself.
Yeah.
But I've found for me that like by challenging the way that I see the world and by, in a lot of ways, purposefully kind of tipping over my mind boxes and reassessing things and being like, what do I actually think about this? Like, what is actually true? What is the truth? I think it's healthy and important. I think that it allows you, I think that there's a lot of stuff in our, to continue using the metaphor, in our mind boxes that's just crap. It's a lot of BS. And when you strip it down and you're like, okay, that thing I believed, it's true, but I can get rid of some of this baggage from it.
Sure.
I think that that's something that's powerful. And so that's just what I've been thinking about as I've been listening to your album, is this idea of doubt and like the beauty and importance of that. And why, like, I think that's okay. I think that's something that like sometimes you almost need permission to be like, it's okay to doubt.
I think like if there's any one message that I could have about this record is that it's not only okay to doubt, I think that it's necessary. Like, I mean, it goes back to kind of our theory of being comfortable or of nesting, right? Like that, it seems to me at least that like a big part of growing up, at least in my perception of it, was that you figure out what you want to do, you figure out where you want to live, you figure out who you want to marry, you figure out how many kids you want to have, and you figure out what you believe. And then you nest, right? Like you get those things and then you build sticks around it, and then that's it. That's your life. And it's basically there's 2 points in your life. It's that the time when you are building your nest, which is figuring out everything that you want and everything that you believe, and then the second half is sitting in your nest. And like the way that I described this to me was like in our lives, inherently there are times when the data that is given to you via your experience and the universe, it is in direct conflict with what you believe. And so you have a couple of options in that moment. And one option is that you say, well, this data must be wrong. Or the second one is that you put them in a ring and you let them fist fight each other. And that is not fun. It sucks. It's like, it's uncomfortable. So for me, the one was like in the first song on my album is talking about like the idea of praying to God and if that works at all. So like, growing up with the idea that like in a more or less like evangelical Christian household, like if you pray to God, it matters and he listens. And I was sitting on the porch with my mom and I was praying for her, and my dad was in the living room with the door open. And when I finished praying for her, he said, Tyson, I don't think that Jesus is in business of healing anymore. This is at the end. This is like kind of at the end when I had come home. And I was like, well, then if he doesn't heal, does he even listen? And if he doesn't listen, then does he even exist? Does he even care? And if he doesn't care, then does he exist? And for me, it was like the easy option would have been like to say, oh, well, the good Lord gives and the good Lord takes away and his ways are not our ways, or whatever. Like the things that you hear when someone says that to you as a
It's kind of the logic. Kid. It's like that's what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah.
And you could just be like, that's what's right. So
totally.
That's what it is.
This is what's true even.
Yeah. And being in the middle of the thing, somebody could offer that advice to you in the moment, but when you're living it, it's a lot harder to take the advice at face value.
Well, I think it's impossible if you're being honest with yourself,
Yeah.
right? So my reaction was that I wasn't going to like let that be the case. I was just going to like let them fight. And that was one of my that was a mind box that got flipped over, right? It's like, oh man, like these two things don't make sense together. I mean, I think that you can be someone that doesn't doubt regardless of your beliefs. You can be someone who believes in a higher power who decides to not doubt that. And that is a lot of people who believe in a higher power. Or you can be someone who doesn't want to think about it. Or you can be someone who actively does not believe. Or, I mean, in anything that you believe in. And I think that, like, you know, even the idea of science is that you are constantly reevaluating the thing that you believe. Like that is, you are never sure. And like I said one time to my friend, we were talking about doubt, and I told him, I said, at this point in my life, like there are things that I believe in, and there are things that maybe I would even die for, like beliefs that I would even die for. But the only thing that I am sure about is that I am wrong. And I might be only a little bit wrong, or I might be super wrong. But I know that I'm wrong. I just know that. Like that's the one thing that I'm sure of, is that I'm wrong. I know that there are like a lot of things that I believe, maybe some things that I would die to protect them as tenets of my life and my family and my country, that I would die for, that are wrong. And that's fine. Like that's okay. And I think that like kind of living with that assumption is a better way to live. I think it's a better way to be a human being, is to be living under the assumption that you are wrong.
I mean, the alternative, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, but the alternative is to not think about it.
Right.
Or the alternative is to assume you're right.
Right.
And between those three options, I would love to constantly be reassessing things, assuming that I'm wrong.
Totally.
I think that's where I'm at too. And I don't know if that's all. In fact, I know that that's not always where I've been at.
Right.
That's been a process of me figuring that out over the last few years.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
I think there's a lot of beauty in the world when you can see everything as a moment to learn.
Yeah.
You know, if I assume that I'm right, then I lose my wonder. I lose my opportunity to gain something from somebody else. And I think it takes wisdom, you know, if you're constantly being like, oh, that's another thing I'll take. That's another thing that's right. That's another thing that I'll accept.
Yeah.
You run into a problem, but if you reject everything, that's another problem. And so it's this idea that like there's this middle gray area.
There's a middle ground, dude. I love that. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot lately too, is just, I think that in general, the middle ground is, first of all, I think that the middle ground is radical now. I think that being in the middle ground is the most radical position you can take on anything.
Especially, you know, if without getting too political, you know, in today's political season,
right,
you basically have people who are extremes on both ends, but that's the majority. And so
I think that it is the vast majority. I think that if you look on Twitter is a great example. Like, what do you hear? You hear people screaming from each side. On anything, or Facebook or whatever. Like if you look on the internet, it's there. Everybody is screaming from one side or another. It's like the positions that used to be radical are now the status quo. And I think that's like sort of the compression of American culture, that you have to be, unless you scream really loud about something that's radical, then you don't matter. But like who is being, I mean, I guess it's hard to have a loud voice when you're standing in the middle and you're like, well, there's validity to both of your thoughts, but
yeah,
I think that is the most radical viewpoint, is to be standing in the middle.
Yep. I had never thought of it as the most radical viewpoint, but I love that. And I think, you know, I think that if I listen to your music, I can hear that middle point. And the thing is, your music, you're not screaming, you're not shouting. It's not like the people on the far ends of the sides aren't going to hear you.
Right.
But some people closer to the middle are going to hear you. And I think that's what's interesting, is you created something that's just a beacon for those who are looking for it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it is. It's that this middle ground is a place where we get to, we're not trying to win. We're just trying to live, and we're trying to learn, and we're just trying to grow. I think that's what it is.
I think that's exactly right. It's trying to grow and trying to find the beauty in the world and to have a full experience of life, which is not just having fun all the time. It's having a full human experience. And I don't know if you can. I don't totally know if you can have that if you are sticking to one wall in any part of your life. I think that it's being able to walk around in it a bit. I think that's where you find the good in it.
Yeah.
That's what I've always loved about all the stuff that you've done, is like finding the way that human beings are able to interact with one another that brings us hope. Like I just love that. I think it's beautiful. And sometimes you find hope by learning what is hopeless, right? Like you find out things by their opposites, and that's kind of, I think, in some ways what this record was for me. But yeah, man, I really like that.
You find hope by learning what is hopeless. That's beautiful. I say we leave it at that, and I want to transition to this. Every episode I ask 3 questions that I love. Question number 1. How would you describe the kind of person that you most admire in the world?
The person that I admire most in the world, I think, is a curious listener.
Curious listener.
I think that's what I aspire the most to be like, and I am so not. I think that's one of the reasons why I admire it so much. But people that are just genuinely excited about hearing. That's who I admire the most. Curious listener.
Curious listener. I like that a lot. What are you consuming right now? Like what is something that you are reading or watching or just engaging with where you're like, this is made for me. This is inspiring me. This is making me live into who I want to be more, or think through the things I want to think about.
So there's this book called Gilead that I just finished. And I always screw up the author's name. It's Marilyn Robinson. That's what it is. I'm pretty sure. It's about this guy who lives in this town, this little farm town, not unlike what we grew up in. And it's him at the end of his life, and he's writing a letter to his young son. And it's a beautiful book. That's got some lines in it that I was just like, I had to sit with him for a little while.
Wow.
But then on the other side of it, like I've been listening to that Kendrick Lamar record like a ton.
Yeah.
I need to spend a little more time with that Chance record too.
I've been loving both of those.
Yeah. I think like the last tour that I did was with my 2 friends from Los Angeles who are both Black Americans, and I felt like just sort of being around them for a month, and sort of getting a view into their world. It gave me a whole new appreciation for that type of music in particular and what they're talking about, and sort of the real hardships of being a person of color in America. I've been thinking about that a lot. It's a long answer, I guess. Those are 2 of the things that I've been consuming. Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah, no, that's exactly my jump into the world of hip hop, is learning, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like I'm trying to challenge myself. You know, growing up, I was the guy who was like, I like all music except for country and except for hip hop.
Yeah.
I probably said except for rap.
Right.
And now I live in Nashville, and I'm starting to learn the nuance and the beauty of country.
Totally.
Some country. There's some that is awful.
Oh yeah.
Bad art. But that's the same with hip hop. But like I'm learning that there's so much beauty and nuance in this thing that I formerly rejected.
Totally. On the countryside, the new Sturgill Simpson record is unbelievable.
Really?
Yeah, that's one.
I'll check that out.
Sturgill Simpson is
boom.
Awesome.
Cool.
That's another one. I threw another one in there at the end.
I love that. Snuck it in. That's good. Okay, I want to ask one last question. I normally ask, like, based on the ways that you've chosen to step out and live your life in the unique way that you have, like, what's one practical way that you would encourage somebody to do something right now, right here? But I maybe want to ask you, like, if there's anybody who's going through something, you know, an experience of grief or an experience of doubt, or, you know, their mind boxes are tipped.
Yeah.
What is an encouragement for them? What's something that they can take action on, live into?
Yeah, I really like that question, man. I mean, I think I would, if there is anything in me that is wise, it's usually a direct plagiarism from my mom. So I would just say that, like, this was the case for me, but being able to look back on my mom's life and death, that she died beautifully. I don't know if I would have thought about it that way if I hadn't leaned into it and processed through things being hard really actively to a place where it feels like you're burning yourself. I think that's probably the first. I think that if you can find a way to make yourself feel hard when things are lost, that ultimately you end up finding you end up burning out the stuff that's hard, and you find a brand new beauty in the end. So that's what I think.
That's good. Mm-hmm. Lean into it.
Lean into it, man.
Lean into it. Well, Tyson, this has been so good.
This is a killer talk, dude.
This is a good freaking talk. It felt like a little counseling session, a little bit of little in depth, but I love your processing through all of this, and I love the intentionality you've had over the last few years, and it's been really interesting that we've been on so much of this same journey,
totally
in fully different ways, incredibly different ways. But I resonated so much with this,
dude. 2 kids from nowhere, Washington, man.
Oh man,
it's awesome.
We'll have to do a reunion.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on tonight,
dude.
Man.
Thanks so much. If people want to find your music, if they want to follow you on the internet, where can they do that?
So my name is Tyson Motsenbocker, which is a really long name. It's just like it sounds. Motsenbocker. That's my website and my Instagram and my Twitter. So
amazing.
There you go.
Cool. Well, dude, I'm so glad we got to have you on the show.
Should we high five?
Yeah, let's high five.
Said I'd walk to San Francisco after everything was done. I thought the noise and moving busy kept my mind from really knowing what was gone. When I finally saw it closing, all those miles above the bay, well, I was only standing closer to the man I tried to lose along the way. But if I'm being honest, yes, if I'm being honest, then I would tell him that it's a picture book. It's a hospital gown. It's an aspen tree in the summer breeze. She saw as waving hands, it's a watching chair and a holy company, like a sailing ship hard rotted in, that will never again float upon the sea. Well, I found that there's a humor old and fond goodbye. As if the early passing was a door that she could look through with a smile. So if I'm being honest, as if I'm being honest, tell her that it's a pair of jeans. It's a rude awakening. It's a fine life lived in the privilege of standing there in the afterlight. It's
Thanks again to Tyson for being on the show. That song you just heard, Honest, is on his new album, Letters to Lost Loves, available everywhere you can find music. Sounds Good with Brandon Harvey is part of the Gradient Podcast Network and is created in collaboration between me, Brandon Harvey, and Gradient. Find them on Facebook and Twitter at gradient.is. That's Gradient, D-O-T-I-S. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode, you guys. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, whatever. That way new episodes of Sounds Good will download to your phone in your sleep. If you want to keep up with my travels and adventures, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat at Brandon Harvey. That's Brandon with an E-N. And you can learn more about me and sign up for my good newsletter at brandonharvey.com. And that's it for this week's podcast. I'll see you next week when we get the opportunity to learn from another incredible person. Sound good?